So Shays' Rebellion was the event that took place in Massachusetts that got folks talking about the strengths and weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. What should we do? Originally, they had decided to meet in Annapolis, Maryland, but only 5 states showed up. So they pushed to get the word out and rescheduled it to meet in Philadelphia. They met 1787 of May. The purpose, it was to discuss trade issues and to reform the Articles of Confederation. The key word is reform, to change it, to tweak it. James Madison and Alexander Hamilton were the main leaders in all of this. Although James Madison was a very quiet, shy man, he played a very important role at the convention. He took very good notes. He came there with a plan and agenda. The plan was to revise the Articles to give national government increased powers to solve the nation's problems. Because remember, during Shays' Rebellion, when Massachusetts called on the national government to help suppress the rebellion, they didn't have the power to do so. Their decision, create a new plan of government, throw out the Articles of Confederation altogether. The Virginia Plan, written mostly by James Madison, also known as the Large State Plan, because Virginia had the largest population of the 13 states. He proposed 3 branches of government. One would be the legislative branch, makes the laws. It would be a 2-house legislature, a bicameral, bi meaning 2. It would be an executive branch. They would carry out the laws and enforce the laws. We'd have a president, and his or her cabinet would be the advisors. The third one is the judicial branch. They would interpret the laws, the court system. The highest one is the Supreme Court. James Madison wrote this plan. He's also known as the father of the Constitution. Again, he was the one that came to the convention with an idea, a plan in hand. His proposal, system of checks and balances between the branches, so no one branch could control the entire government. Each one has a responsibility that holds another branch accountable. For example, the president will appoint a Supreme Court justice to the judicial branch, but it must be approved by the legislative branch first. The Congress would be bicameral. Number of representatives would be based on the state's population. It would be divided how it's elected. The lower house, the House of Representatives, would be elected by the eligible voters of each state. The upper house, the Senate, would be elected by the lower house. Conflict. The larger a state's population, the more representatives it would have. Smaller states thought it was unfair since larger states would control the Congress.
Jasmine Gregory, come to the front office.
The New Jersey Plan. This is going to counter the large state plan proposed by William Paterson of New Jersey. What was the plan? It would be one house, unicameral legislator. Each state would send the same number of representatives, equal representation. Who proposed the plan? Smaller states like New Jersey, Delaware, etc. How elected? Representatives would be chosen by the state legislators. This plan was very much like the Articles of Confederation, putting more power with the states and less with the national government. What to do? There's going to be a great compromise, also called the Connecticut Compromise, by Roger Sherman. Took parts of both plans. Mostly came from the Virginia Plan. From the Virginia Plan, it'd be bicameral, bi meaning 2, lower house representation based on population, elected by the people to represent the people. Rest of the government as proposed by Madison. The 3 branches of government, the checks and balances. From the New Jersey Plan, the upper house would have equal representation. 2 representatives per state chosen by the state legislators to represent states. We know that's changed today. We, as state citizens, elect the lower and the upper. Now there's going to be 2 major issues. The first one's going to be, what are we going to do about the slaves? Of course, the South, with a major slave population, wants them to be counted towards representation. Otherwise, they would not have as great representation in the national government as the northern states. What was the compromise? For every 5 slaves, 3 would count for taxation and representation. Who benefited? Southern states. How do they benefit? More representation in the legislative branch also meant more influence in choosing the president. 3/5 compromise acknowledges that slavery exists. Slavery is never specifically mentioned in the Constitution until the 13th Amendment in 1865 after the Civil War. The role of the president. He or she would be called the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and responsible for foreign relations, dealing with other countries. Also set guidelines for domestic policies. Our country, domestic meaning home. He or she has veto power. Also appoints judges and other federal officials. For example, the Supreme Court and the cabinet. The president is surrounded by cabinet members that help advise them on foreign relations, domestic problems. Can be elected to 2 4-year terms. And that didn't come into play until after FDR, Roosevelt, had served 4 terms as president. Must be 35 and a natural-born citizen. Williamson's contribution. He's from North Carolina. His name's Hugh. He's going to be the North Carolina delegate to the Constitutional Convention. He is an anti-federalist. He opposed to strong national government, believes that states should have more power. He contributes the impeachment process, which is the removal of a president for wrongdoing. And really, if you impeach a president, it still needs to go to a trial before they can be removed. You're not automatically removed if you're impeached. 2/3 majority vote would override a presidential veto. So if a president vetoes a law, it can go back to the legislative branch and will be passed with a 2/3 majority. The next problem will be the trade. The issue, who would control foreign trade? The North wants Congress, the legislative branch, to control trade regulations. The South would like each state should set its own rules. The compromise. Congress had the power to control trade with other countries and could tax imports, products coming into the country, but could not tax exports, products going out of the country. Congress could not do anything about the slave trade for 20 years. After that, it would be outlawed. Congress could regulate trade between the states. The Constitution becomes law in 1788 when New Hampshire becomes the 9th state to ratify it. North Carolina will be the 12th state to ratify the Constitution in 1789. Ratification of the Constitution. Ratification, approval. It was important that although they wanted the national government to be strong and have a healthy balance between national and state governments, it was important that we still maintained a popular sovereignty where the final political power rests with the people. And a sense of federalism with a strong national government that shares powers with the states. This is where you're going to find your first political parties. The first party is going to be called the Federalist. The leaders are Alexander Hamilton and James Madison. We know that James Madison was the father of the Constitution, so the Federalists are going to support the Constitution. They favored a strong national government with a loose interpretation of the Constitution. Domestic policy in your country. Supported a national bank. Favored high tariffs or taxes to provide money for government. And favored limited freedom of speech and press. Foreign policy, dealing with other countries. They favored the British and were opposed to the French. They felt like that a Bill of Rights was not needed. Each state constitution would protect individual rights. At this time, each state had written their own state constitution, and they had all had included a Bill of Rights. Therefore, they didn't feel like the national constitution required a Bill of Rights. It was favored by the wealthy, manufacturers, shippers, business people, and urban areas. The Anti-Federalists, they opposed the Constitution, also known as the Democratic Republicans. The leaders of this are Thomas Jefferson and George Mason. Favored states' rights, weak national government, and a strict interpretation of the Constitution. Domestic policy, opposed to the national bank. Tariffs should be low, and more rights for the people. Their foreign policy, they favored the French and were opposed to the British. So just completely opposite of the Federalists. The Bill of Rights, they thought that it was necessary that the national government, the Constitution, had a Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights was extremely important to protect the rights of the people, needed to protect the minority from the will of the majority. Favored by farmers, planters, rural areas. North Carolina was mostly anti-Federalist. The main issue for several states before they would ratify the Constitution was to include a Bill of Rights to protect the rights of individuals. Amendments, additions to the constitutions. Amendments meaning changes or additions. Have to be approved by 2/3 of Congress, signed by President, and ratified by 3/4 of states. Today we have 27 amendments. The Electoral College, some delegates did not trust the people to elect the president, decided against a direct election of the president. Instead, each state would choose electors, qualified voters, to elect president and vice president. The number of electors would be equal to a state's representation in Congress. Today, the popular vote determines how electoral votes are awarded. In most states, the popular winner gets all electoral votes. The Constitution is ratified by all states by 1790, world's oldest written constitution, America. 1791, the Bill of Rights is ratified. The Bill of Rights is your first 10 amendments, your first 10 additions to the Constitution. George Washington is going to be your first president, 1789 to 1797, was opposed to political parties and foreign involvement, except dealing with trade. He dies in 1799. The state of Franklin is located in what is today eastern Tennessee, offered by North Carolina to Congress to pay off war debts. Its intent was to become the 14th state of America, but it never fell through. It was rescinded. Now we're going to go into detail about the legislative branch. The Congress is a two-house legislature, bicameral. The Senate is made up of 100 members. Each state gets 2. We have 50 states. Elected to a 6-year term, unlimited. Must be 30. The House of Representatives, the lower house, is 435 members based on a state's population. Elected to a 2-year term, unlimited. Must be 25 years old. The judicial branch is the highest courts is the Supreme Court, has